1,000 questions in here, so I'm worried if I don't make a start, we'll be here to the morning. If we don't get through them all, we might allocate a little bit of time tomorrow, perhaps, because there's nothing worse than having questions unanswered, is there? So I'll make a start. And when meditating, random memories from way back pop into my head. Why is this? Usually it's because these things have made an effect on our mind, and so they could be sometimes memories of something a little bit intense in our life, something traumatic, things that have really made a deep impression, or they could just be things that have been triggered by a sequence of memories. So these things don't tend to arise just on their own. When you have some clarity in your mind, you can see the way these things appear and disappear, and you can see the causes for them appearing, and you can even sometimes track back a little bit. So it's never usually completely random, and sometimes it's even just like a feeling tone or experience that you're going through triggers a memory. These memories are usually not very important, and that's why it's easy for us to just let them go. And the more you meditate, the more you see that this pattern of behavior, this mental pattern of behavior, doesn't bring you any benefit. And so this is why we say at the beginning of the meditation session, letting go of the past, letting the past be. And it's not that we can't learn any lessons from the past, it's more that we can't affect it. And sometimes it's difficult for us to acknowledge that our memory is now almost a complete fabrication of our mind. That the details that we think we remember, I mean, there's so many experiments done on memory and how faulty it is, like police investigating accidents and the witnesses can't even agree on the colour of the cars involved. You know, the memory can be quite faulty, and usually every time we remember something, we remember it in a way that usually shows us in a good light more and more, or that colours this memory in such a way that might not bear any relation to the actual sequence of events. So the problem for us is that we actually can't trust our perception until we've got a really, really beautiful, clean mind. And so these memories that pop up, I reckon just acknowledge them, that they're there, and give yourself permission to let them go. And what happens is this tendency of the mind to reach out to new experiences, old memories, this eventually, with more practice, subsides, and these thoughts stop appearing in the mind. So in the meantime, we use this wholesome strategy that I talked about today, the simile of the peg. We hammer out the old thought pattern with the new thought pattern. The new thought pattern is putting the attention and the awareness on a wholesome or a neutral object like the breath. That's what we do with random thoughts. Don't pay too much attention to them. When I begin to meditate, I notice my heart rate increases. My breathing becomes shallow. Almost a state of anxiety occurs in me. How can we begin to control this? Well, trying to control it is just going to make the anxiety worse. What we need to do is just relax. So it sounds to me like there's perhaps some fear, maybe even some grief in your heart. And so when we sit down, when we stop being busy, we stop arranging our life to ignore these things that are there, and when we sit down and look, we see the state of mind that has been existing there all along. I know that when I became a monk, I thought that I was pretty cool at life. I thought I don't have any anger in my heart. But then I saw in my practice that I did actually have a lot of anger in my heart. What had happened was that instead of being busy all the time and arranging my life so that I could avoid problematic people, I, at the monastery, couldn't avoid people who I had difficulties with. And so then I could really see that this anger was there all along, but I'd just been covering it up. And sometimes it's the same with anxiety or fear or grief. It can be there, but we haven't dealt with it. So what I would say to you is just to acknowledge that it's there, and in acknowledging there's this shallow breathing, a sense of anxiety, we can let it go. And one way that we can let it go is to know that these things don't last forever, that anxiety is a fear of the future, or a fear of things happening even in this moment, making us more anxious about the future. So just acknowledge and let it go, and the breathing will calm the anxiety. And if you do have anxiety, it's good to check out the internet for a list of things that can help you, some strategies to deal with anxiety. And one of them that you'll find listed quite commonly is to develop mindfulness of breathing practice. So I'd say stick with it. Don't worry. And also, just because it's happening now, does it mean it will be happening tomorrow or in the future? So you can let it go. What's my background? What led me to Buddhism? You are enlightening. That's very nice. This one doesn't say anything. My background is, I guess you're asking maybe about my work background, perhaps? So I used to work in cultural institutions and museums and with young people a lot, and that was quite stimulating and very invigorating. I really liked working with young people because they are so fresh and so open to new ideas and different ways of doing things. But I was attracted to Buddhism when I myself was a young person, many, many years ago now, and it really didn't make much sense at the time. Growing up as a boy in the suburbs of Sydney, I had a really strong tendency towards the spiritual. Started practicing yoga when I was 12 or 13. And I remember going to a travel agent with my mother and seeing all these magazines of Thailand, usually, and monks and stupas and things like that, and kind of collecting them and keeping them in a little stash I made of this weird collection of things. But it wasn't until I first did a meditation retreat when I was about 19 that it started to make sense to me. And that was that the meditation was really beautiful. And at that moment I knew, and this is the true story, at that moment I knew I wanted to become a monk, but I was like 19. And so I was like, oh. So I lived a non-monk life for many years and gradually brought my spirituality into the center of my life. So often we keep spirituality at the periphery of our life, and that's what we're talking about today, like where are your priorities, where are your spiritual priorities? If you keep your spirituality at the periphery of your life, then, and you keep your work at the middle, then you're never going to reap the benefits of a truly spiritual life. And for me, that occurred when I started teaching yoga full-time, and I really got a sense that the spiritual life was the life that I wanted to live, and that gave me the confidence that I could become a monk and that it would work. And so far it's been okay, and yeah, I have to say it's a very beautiful way to live as well. While meditating, sometimes pretty boring. Pretty boring plans related to work. Well, that's your problem. Thinking about work comes to mind. What type of hindrance is that? How can I get over it easily? So this is okay. This is the habit pattern of your mind. You've spent 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, many, many years working, And this is what happens. It's like that image I used today of the train traveling very fast. You pull the handbrake. It takes a long time to slow down and stop. But the good news is, the longer you spend away from work, the less those thoughts are going to occur. However, you may stop making plans about work, but you might start making plans about redecorating your room. So what that mind is and what that hindrance is restlessness, wanting to do something. So the Buddha said that this mind is like a slave driver. So when we have the hindrance of restlessness in our mind, we are the slave. And it's like, think about work, make plans for work, make plans for redecoration. And we're like, okay. And we do it. This is a hindrance that treats us like a slave. And so this is what's happening to you. You have a small hindrance, and the longer you meditate, the longer you spend away from work, the less it will have. And the more you meditate, the more skillful you become in your meditation practice, the less likely these hindrances are going to arise in your mind. So when they do arise, the trick is to recognize them. This is a hindrance. Remember those 5 things? This does not lead to good results for me, does not lead to good results for others. It does not develop wisdom. It obstructs wisdom. It leads to vexation, problems, and it doesn't lead to enlightenment. So when we see in this way using wise attention, we recognize a hindrance is there and it's very easy for it to let go. At the beginning of our meditation practice, if we haven't been practicing a long time, or if we practice infrequently, these hindrances can become very strong. But the more you practice, the more mindfulness you develop, the more you see with wise attention, then these hindrances, when they appear in the mind kind of looks at it and like a laser, it's like, choo! You see it as a hindrance and it vanishes like that. So that's something to look forward to as you keep on practicing. Would our mind explaining the benefit of silence for meditating and for meal times? We have chatterboxes in the dining hall. How can they be talking if they're meant to be eating? So the benefit of silence is that the mind can become quiet. So most of our lives we spend talking about anything at all that comes into our head. And sometimes it's useful, most of the time it's not very useful. And on a meditation retreat, we really want to reserve communication for times when it's really useful and not use communication when it's not useful, so that the mind can become quiet. For us, coming to a retreat like this, it's quite difficult to make that transition from a life where we talk a lot, talk about anything, talk about the weather, talk about the food, talk about this, talk about that. It's very difficult for us to make that transition sometimes, but it's something that's worth sometimes practicing with, because when you do, the mind can become so quiet. Even your internal voice quietens down. But if you have conversations with people about this or about that, when it comes time to sit down again, you're still having that conversation, you're remembering that conversation. So that's one of the drawbacks of talking on a retreat. This is a retreat also to do with friendship, kalyana mitta. So if you make friends in the dining hall, lovely, good. Maybe go away from other people if you want to have a chat, so that other people can maintain their silence and get some peace in their meditation. How to meditate without falling asleep. Also, is there a state in between being conscious and unconscious while meditating? It's like I could hear your voice, but I feel like I am sleeping. Usually this hindrance, and it is a hindrance, sloth, torpor, tinamida in the Pali. This is a hindrance because it causes us to sink down. It takes us away from the present moment. So this hindrance will appear when we are tired. And I would bet that if you've been working and you've got a really busy life and you got up at 4:30 this morning, that you will have some tiredness in your mind. So if this hindrance appears, sometimes you just need to go and have a little lie down or a little nap, and it will disappear. And that just means you've been tired. Yeah, you're just tired. But if after you get up from your nap, you still feel tired, that's when you know you've got a real hindrance to work with. So if you're tired and you fall asleep, good, you're relaxed. If you've been meditating and listening to my voice and you can still hear my voice, but you're still feeling relaxed, good. The body is relaxing, the mind is becoming calm and peaceful. You're still aware, but you're not reaching out. So that's fine. That doesn't mean you're unconscious or in between. It doesn't mean you've gone away to another dimension. It just means that the body is relaxing, the mind is becoming calm, and your mind isn't reaching out for objects. That's okay. Yes, what is the Buddhist perspective on mental health? Is depression something we allow to happen to us? All of the Buddhist path is dependent on causes and conditions. So all the things that we experience in life originate from causes and conditions. Our experience is conditioned. So everything is kind of contingent. That means kind of leaning up against something else. And so things like our mental health are dependent upon external causes and conditions, as well as internal causes and conditions, and they merge. So if you're in an environment like, say, a crazy capitalistic society at the end of time, like we are now, then it's quite a difficult environment to be in. If you have to work all day in a job you hate, go home to a family who's busy and stressed, and live a life like this, then it's quite likely that depression might arise in your mind because of the external conditions, and because when we are challenged in our life, we start to have internal conditions that become adverse. There's also patterns of thinking. I know I've been depressed in the past, and I know that it's in result of causes and conditions, and the ways that I've dealt with those causes and conditions. So if we're not careful, these things can become very deeply entrenched. And it's quite common, these neural pathways in our mind. Science looks at these and says it's kind of like footprints in the sand. The more people walk in those certain places, the more entrenched those neural pathways become, the more entrenched those thought patterns become, which is how we have depressive behaviours, depressive thinking. So the good news is that the brain is quite plastic. And when I showed you that chart so many hours ago now, this morning, about the benefits of meditation, one of the things it said was that the brain plasticity can become more plastic through meditation. That means that we're able to change the way we think through meditation. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of joy coming into the mind, can completely disrupt those old thought patterns of behaviour. And so that's why with people who are depressed, what's happened is the serotonin uptake in the brain has become inhibited, and you don't feel happy anymore. You can't generate happiness by yourself. And that's because of the way that the thinking patterns are occurring. And that's why often people will take medication so that they can start to reconnect the synapses that lead to happier ways of thinking. So depression is something that we can deal with through meditation, and also through counselling or even with medical practitioners. But there's no one cause, there's nothing wrong with you. This is just something that comes and can also go.